The Scholars Chair presents an interfaith dialogue with members from the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. Our topic, conscious liberty from a theological perspective. Our guests are Martha Woody from the Jewish tradition. Following her, from the Islamic tradition, Eman Kaskas. And from Howard University, from the Islamic tradition, Dr. Fatimah Jackson. And the co-organizer of this event and director of the Interfaith Coalition of Bowie, Tameeka Washington. She will be speaking from the Christian tradition. We will start by an explanation by Martha Woody, explaining to us the difference between freedom and liberty.
Freedom means being free to do what I will and what I can do, whereas liberty is limited by the rights of others. It's the responsible use of freedom without depriving others of their freedom, which I thought was an interesting distinction and something that helps to, I think, inform our discussion tonight. Mm-hmm. I'm going to talk about, and actually I'm really talking kind of more in general terms as opposed to specifically about women's issues, although I certainly will get into that, because I do think the issues of being able to choose our religion, being able to observe our religion, and being given equal status under the law is both a religious issue as well as a gender issue, as well as a race issue, as well as a ethnic issue. I mean, it covers a great deal of ground. But speaking to Judaism specifically, one is that the central narrative of Judaism is the deliverance from slavery in Egypt. And I prefer to use the Hebrew term, Mitzrayim, which means narrow straits, because I think that makes the whole story of the Exodus more meaningful, since we all have tight spaces that we need deliverance from. Mm-hmm. And it also means that whether the Exodus really happened or not, there is a message there that we can all hopefully take away. And Jews talk about the Exodus, about being delivered by and God's mighty hand and outstretched arm every Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover. Again, it is this central narrative of being delivered from slavery. Mm-hmm. And also at the heart of Judaism is the value of human life. Mm-hmm. It is permissible to violate pretty much any other law in Judaism in order to save someone else's life. Saving one life is equivalent to saving an entire world. Mm-hmm. So taking those two things, deliverance and the value of human life, that Judaism sees the key to freedom as a balance between four different things: myself, my fellow human beings, society, and God. And a quote from an article entitled, "Why is this freedom different from all other freedoms?" Is true freedom is not the absence of bondage, but the presence of justice and purpose. And I would, it goes on to talk about freedom without responsibility makes us a slave to our baser instincts. And I definitely think that's true. Mm-hmm. I also want to quote Abraham Joshua Heschel of blessed memory, who I believe originally came up with the saying that in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible, because all of us have some responsibility for what happens in our society. Mm-hmm. With regard to the sacredness of human life and the current controversy over legislation concerning abortion, Judaism traditionally has considered the life of the mother to be paramount. And additionally, traditionally, Judaism has not considered the fetus to be a human being until it is viable outside of the mother's body. Mm-hmm. When it threatens the life of the mother, it's considered a rodef, which is one who is pursuing another in order to murder him or her. One of the reactions to what has gone on recently has been a lawsuit brought by Congregation Lador Vador in Florida. And Lador Vador means from generation to generation. They have filed a lawsuit against the Florida law criminalizing abortion, stating that it violates the Florida Constitution, which protects the freedom to exercise religion. And at the same time, it denies women both the right and the freedom to control their own bodies. I might even suggest that in this case, the legislature in Florida could be seen as acting as a RODEF, pursuing women to end their right to autonomy in their own lives. Now, in some ways, that could be certainly extended to other states. And, perhaps even the Supreme Court, which I will say in recent decisions, certainly overturning of Roe versus Wade, but also in other decisions regarding the practice of religion, seems to be weighing the scales a little more heavily in terms of the Christian tradition that is prevalent in our country. But at this point, and along these lines, but circling back to the story of the redemption from Mitzrayim, one of the questions that gets asked at our Passover Seder is why the people there had to suffer from the plagues because of Pharaoh's hard-heartedness. And one of the answers that's given is that many times the decisions of leaders, political or governmental or whatever, negatively affect the people that they are supposed to be caring for, the people that they are supposed to protect. And certainly we see that over and over and over again, pretty much everywhere. That it seems difficult, especially for, I was going to say especially men in power, but that's not true. It seems particularly difficult for people in power not to make their own agenda the agenda that everyone should embrace wholeheartedly. And I would say that gets us way too far afield from what we are commanded to do by Micah the prophet, which is to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with our God. Thank you.
Following Martha Woody is Eman Kaskas from the Islamic tradition, directing us to inclusivity of all religions.
My Quranic understanding comes from a perspective of inclusivity to all faith, simply because that's what the Quran teaches. And so therefore, when you wanted a Muslim perspective, I can't talk about justice or conscious liberty without including all scriptures. And that comes from the study that both Safi and I did of the three scriptures. Nothing that Martha said I would disagree with. As a matter of fact, so much of what she said, as you stated, is Quranic. And it's amazing to have that meeting of the mind before we even begin.
Yes.
I'd like to actually share a little bit about my journey in this country. I came at an early age in the mid-70s. And one of the things that struck me the most is a campaign that was ongoing and was highly in the media at that time. It was called the Equal Right Amendment. And it was an amendment that was to ratify the American Constitution. And I was actually shocked, coming from a country like Lebanon at an early age, thinking that I'm coming to a country with so much liberty and equality and all of that, yet women were in the streets fighting for their right. That is something I had a hard time understanding. What was even harder and more difficult to comprehend is the fact that that amendment never passed and the Constitution was not ratified.
Oh.
And a few years ago, I was asked to give a talk about the status of women at the United Nations. And I talked about this, and I said, it is amazing. I just feel in many ways women have accomplished so much on their own without the legality, without the legal support of the system. But yet the fight is ongoing. And I learned when I did research then that you cannot try to ratify the Constitution except every 25 years. So the woman in the mid-70s had to put the issue on a silent mode and working sort of in a stealth way to continue this fight, but they had to wait and they continue to wait. And what is even more difficult to comprehend today is the fact that almost a century later, from the beginning of this equal right issue, when it came to light, we are still fighting for it. And recently it did not pass in Virginia, and the fight is ongoing. It was in 1923 that Alice Paul drafted the Equal Right Amendment. And I didn't know that. I did some research in order to really try to understand the history. And that's when I realized that this has been going on for almost a century. And she proposed equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provision of this article. The text of the amendment is simple, elegant, and difficult to disagree with, but it has yet to be added to the US Constitution. That is very difficult for me to comprehend. That is not acceptable 100 years later. And especially because, again, I come from a Quranic perspective, and one of the verses that means so much to me is just a simple few words from God. He told us we have honored the children of Adam. And the children of Adam includes all of us. It includes men and women. The Quran gives equal responsibility to men and women when it addresses. It does not distinguish, it does not separate based on ethnic background, social status, or any of that. It just states, throws a blanket statement on humanity by saying we have honored the children of Adam. More than 1,000 years prior, one person single-handedly attempted to restructure the society he lived in based on the belief in one God. And based upon the concept of people, God-giving rights. Throughout his life, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, advocated for rights similar to what the founding father were calling for. But his advocacy went beyond that of the founder, being that the founders were mainly advocating for the rights of males of European descent. The Prophet Muhammad strove to ensure the rights of women, orphans, widows, and the poor. He also sternly advocated for the end of slavery. The Prophet Muhammad advocacy is beautifully summarized in a quote from his final sermon, and for centuries, his true followers struggled and continue to struggle to uphold these rights. O people, your Lord is one, and your Father is one. All of you are from Adam, and Adam is from dust. The most honorable of you with God is the most God-conscious. Beautiful word said by a man, but in my opinion, these teaching, these principles that he taught us are universal, didn't just come from Prophet Muhammad. I believe one of the greatest commandments that God has given us, which began with Moses, is to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and spirit. And the second to me is also equally important, is to love for your neighbor what you love for yourself. That to me is justice. If this conscious liberty, this is it. If this is applied throughout, I think our world would be a different world. The same the same principle were applied by Jesus when asked by some of his followers, what is the greatest commandment, Rabbi? And his response was the same, to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and spirit. And then the second is to love for your neighbor what you love for yourself. And then he said a few words that are very important. On this hangs all the laws of all the prophets. So he summarized it all for us. Then Prophet Muhammad said exactly the same, except he said in the very beginning, you do not believe until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. And this is known among communities of believers as the golden rule. Why is it the golden rule? It's because it provides the safety net that we all need to coexist and to live together in peace and harmony. I think this is what God meant by equating, by saying the second is like it. He equated our love for one another to our love for him.
Yeah.
And that to me is just a clarity that does not come from human being. It's a clarity that only comes from him. And the Quran has stated many verses that has to do with justice and with liberty. One, and well, I already stated one, we have honored the children of Adam and carried them over land and sea and provided sustenance for them out of life's good things and favored them for a greater extent than most of our creation. That's 1770. And then another verse, believer, uphold justice and bear witness to God, even if that witness is against yourself, your parents, or your close relatives. Whether a person is rich or poor, God can best take care of both. Refrain from following your own desires so that you do not act unjustly. If you distort the truth, God is fully aware of what you do. That's 4:135. Then believers, always be steadfast in your devotion to God, equitably bearing witness to truth. Never let hatred for any people lead you to deviate from being just to them.
Yeah.
Be just, for that is closer to being mindful of God. Always be mindful of God. God is well aware of what you do. That's 5:8. Believer, no man shall ridicule others, for they may be better than them. Nor shall any woman ridicule other women, nor they may be better than them. Nor shall you slander one another, nor shall you call each other names. How bad is it to be called disobedient after accepting faith? Those who do not repent of this behavior are unjust. 49:11. But whoso does good works, whether male or female, and is a believer, such shall enter heaven and shall not be wronged, even as much as the little hollow in the back of a date stone. That's 4:125. I have many others, but in the interest of time, I should probably stop here and give room to others to share what's on their mind.
You guys got a great sense of timing. It's amazing. You have mentioned a lot of Quranic information, but I want to give Professor Fatimah Jackson just kind of a summation of what she feels the topics and the speakers have presented, what it means to her, and what she'd like to see. What ideas she would like to see put forward. Dr. Fatimah.
But this was very interesting and right on point. Dr. Woody, Dr. Kaskas, a very bright and insightful comments on women's reproduction as a component of liberty and freedom. And I really like the ideas that both of my colleagues here have espoused. Dr. Woody, you talked about liberty and freedom in the Judaic context. And I think that that value of human life is really fundamental and was a fundamental part of Christianity originally. And of course, Christianity has morphed. But if you go back to the scriptures, there's still that emphasis on the value of life. And of course, it also extends into Islam, given the close relationship of the three editions, as it were, of the Word of God. Um, I like the idea of the balance that's required to have life that you spoke of, and um, the specificity that says that the life of the mother trumps the life of the child. It doesn't mean that the child's life is not important, but in the hierarchy of value, it kind of makes sense. And what I'm hearing from both of you is that a level of specificity from Judaism and an overall concept from Islam that dovetail, you know, that give us a very cohesive view of the value of the human being. Um, Dr. Kaskas has talked about the children of Adam as inclusive, and again, which is a fundamental part of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Although sometimes you would forget it listening to the self-proclaimed experts.
Yes.
I think the issue for me is that we always have a tendency, or we always have the potential to deviate from the very clear instructions of our Creator God, which is why we have to restructure, and that's the restructuring that Dr. Kaskas spoke of. And of course, that has also occurred in Judaism, and it seems to be constantly happening in Christianity. Um, but the connectedness of the scriptures and the golden rule is that Dr. Kaskas mentioned is again a fundamental thread linking Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I was surprised when I went up to the University of Maryland Hospital, saw the writings on the wall there. You know, if a person has saved one life, they've saved all humanity. I said, oh my God, that's an Islamic saying, but it's a Jewish saying. And fundamentally, it's at the heart of Christianity, although, again, people sometimes tend to forget in the numerous wars that have been fought um, because of people's beliefs rather than seeing their unity. Um, I wanted to say a few things just about this topic of abortion, which has just ignited the imaginations of many people in this country and all over the world, because the United States is something of a leader in world communities. And as we behave, we see other nations emulating. I don't know why they would want to emulate us, but they do. And I think it has to do with our money, our resources, and our clout. But abortion is just a part of female reproductive rights. It's not the entirety of it. But specifically on abortion, I mean, what we are lacking in the current Supreme Court decision is the specificity for the nuance of life. That if we simply follow the 10 commandments, it's not enough. It's not enough because they're too generic. That we have a saying in Islam that actions are judged by their intentions. So you have to look at the intentions, before you cut off the hand of the thief. You have to realize it. Is he hungry? Was and so abortion in Islam is embedded in a whole contextual requirement, as everything else in life should be, embedded in an entire requirement. I mean, if we simply said, "Thou shalt not kill," but we kill all the time. You know, we kill for food, we kill each other, you know, we kill criminals, we kill people unjustly detained, you know, because so the killing of people, we already don't follow the simple um, rules that actually came out of ancient Egypt, and you see them listed in the Book of the Dead. But that just makes me feel that the message has been around for a long time.
Mhm.
And yet we as a species are so reticent to actually imbibe it. We keep looking for ways to separate ourselves. I learned from a series of lectures earlier this month that Islam was initially considered a branch of Christianity because it wasn't considered to be a separate religion. You know, um, again, pointing to the philosophical unity of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Mhm.
In any event, there are many paths and rationales that could be utilized to justify a more liberal and inclusive view of female reproductive rights.
Mhm.
And I think that Islam, Christianity, and Judaism has the evidence for that inclusivity and that flexibility. It's just something that we have imposed, we humans have imposed upon the actual Word of God to make it constricted and confined and um, unfree.
Mhm. I'm free. Yes.
Unfree, yeah.
Yes.
So that's again, we have the rule in Islam about the soul entering the body at 40 days, which biologically, because I'm a scientist, biologically that's very interesting because there are a lot of embryological changes that the fetus is undergoing, the zygote to the fetus, to the and that those changes pretty much correspond to the trimesters indicated in the Quran. Um,
Yeah.
and even in Bukhari in the Hadith says that the soul enters the body after 40 days. So there's a again, that's the nuance
Mhm.
that we tend to ignore in some of these proclamations that, oh, we have to be fair to both the mother and the child. Well, the truth is that in pregnancy, you really can't separate the mother and the child. It's like one organism,
Right.
you know? so, so the, um, the, uh, the issues that you've brought up here is very good that they're being discussed and very important that they're being considered in a spiritual context.
Mhm.
But then at the end of the day, we also have to check our own hearts. We have to use our intelligence. You know, we have to give ourselves permission to think, how are we going to apply the mandates that come from our common creator?
Interesting. Mhm. Interesting. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. You know, I deeply appreciate the expertise that you have in biology, and I failed to mention that you're head of the biology department at our university. So thank you for sparing us a little time, because I know that school is in session. I want to follow up on with a question. What is the value of women's freedom to choose? If maybe we can get each one of you to speak to that. In other words, it seems to me that throughout our traditions, the woman's, a human being's right to choose religion or not religion, or the value systems that are given to us in our traditions. What is the value of a woman having the freedom to choose? And please, I want you to know that I'm a very liberated person, so I'm asking this question for the benefit of our tapes. So take your daggers back a little bit, but please, the values of women's freedom to choose. Martha, I'll give you the first shot at it.
Well, I mean, I would probably start by quoting Eman, that and the Quran, that, you know, we're all descendants of Adam, and, you know, I would add, and Eve. And of course, there are two in Genesis, there are two creation stories, one where Eve is sort of an ancillary to Adam, but another where they're both created at the same time. Mm-hmm. I think from a practical standpoint, one of the things that can make a huge difference in the quality of life for everyone in a society is the ability of women to choose the size of their family and the temporal spacing of pregnancies. And I will say that, you know, part of my thought is, if we don't want abortion, then I'm not sure why we're not making reproductive health care readily available and free, because that is certainly one way of making sure that women are able to make that choice. But again, that has a ripple effect that is enormous. And I think there's been a lot of research done in countries that where traditionally women have not been able to make that choice, or have not had the resources available to them. And when that happens, again, there is that, it's a rising tide that floats all boats. Mm-hmm. And I think just from my own experience as a mother, you know, I think mm-hmm. I cannot, you know, my grandmother had children pretty much every year for many years. And I look at that list of my mother's siblings, and she was the youngest, and think, why that her mother didn't go crazy or shoot someone, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Except maybe there was more family help that was close by. I don't know. But mm-hmm. I could not imagine having several sets of what they call Irish twins, you know, 11 months apart. Mm-hmm. So, but the short answer is, women are as much human as men are. Mm-hmm. And biologically, there are differences. And I would point to Serena Williams and Roger Federer. Mm-hmm. She had some issues she had to take into account in her career that he did not have to take into account in his career. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, at basis, as human beings, we are deserving of the same rights and responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And again, when those are recognized, then I think it has a marvelous effect on everyone.
So to actually respond to reality, we have to take responsibility for ourselves. Is essentially what you're saying. Eman, what are your thoughts? What are the value of women's freedom to choose?
Well, this issue is actually addressed in two verses I'd like to share with you, mm-hmm. Of equality of men and women. It's verse 33, 35, the submitting man, the submitting woman, yeah. The believer man, the believing woman, the obedient man, the obedient woman, the truthful man, the truthful woman, the steadfast man, the steadfast woman, the reverent man, the reverent woman, the charitable man, the charitable woman, the fasting man, the fasting woman, the chaste man, the chaste woman, and the man who commemorate God frequently, and the commemorating woman. God has prepared for them forgiveness and a great recompense. In this verse, I see the equal responsibility given by God to both male and female. Equal responsibility. God does not differentiate between us. We are the children of Adam. He does not differentiate. He gives us equal responsibility and holds us accountable for those responsibilities equally, not less, not more. In my opinion, women have the right to choose. You see me, I'm a Muslim woman, I'm not wearing a hijab, but I respect highly the choice of women that choose to wear hijab. Every single sister in my family, we're 5 girls, every single sister is wearing the hijab, and I highly, affectionately love that they made that choice for themselves. We all do that, and we are responsible for our deeds when we one day stand in front of God to respond to why we make the choices. It is not here on earth. This accountability is to him only. In his eyes, we are equal, and therefore we should be treated equally. That's my, and the other verse, I didn't read it. I'm always conscious of time. The other verse is 49:13. O people, we created you from the same male and female and rendered you distinct people and tribes, that you may recognize one another. The best among you in the sight of God is the most righteous. God is omniscient, cognizant. So therefore, equality.
Yes, I've always, I don't hear Muslims reading that verse very much, but it is an absolute equality as being expressed there.
In every aspect.
In every aspect, and the Quran doesn't just say all people; it names them out specifically. That the man do this, believing men, believing women, etc. And exactly. I think that is very powerful. And yes, and I think that we are getting to the gist of why I want to have this conversation, is this equality before responsibility, in the face of responsibility. I want to give Ms. Washington a shot here, because she is the director of the Interfaith Coalition of Bowie, Maryland. And she is the mastermind behind all the technology here. So Ms. Washington, give us your view.
So this conversation has been wonderful so far. I have been taking notes furiously. The thing that Dr. Eman just said, women are just as much humans as are men, broke my heart with the truth of it and the clarity of it, and the need to even say that. As a Christian, right, this conversation about equality and about abortion is tricky, right? Because the evangelicals have taken over this topic for us and run with it. But let me tell you how good God is. We have a Bible study that all adults in our church read so we're all reading the same lesson. And today's lesson is about free will, right? The basis for love. And it talks about this free will being, you cannot have a love relationship without it. It cannot be forced, and so it is the foundation of our relationship with God. And so when we talk about who we are or what choices we make, those are our choices to make as our heart and our situations and our circumstances see fit. Our value is clear all throughout the Bible. And so this sense of equality about who we are is not a fact that to be disputed. It is stated that we are equal. And so we need to always remember that as we think about how we operate in the society. The other thing that was said earlier, this talking about the ideal of America, right? And then the version of America that you actually get when you come to our shores is very different. And as a person of color, as a woman, this idea of being less than, being less free, is always something that we struggle with. And so this conversation is critical because these issues also impact our community more than others. And so we need to be clear in our spiritual walk about having the freedom to make the choice. God wants this freedom for us. He demands it. And so we must follow him.
Absolutely.
Well stated. I think that the idea of compulsive love is not love at all. So I think that's very, very powerful idea. And also the freedom to love. It's also a very interesting dynamic that's going on there. Dr. Jackson, please follow us up. We have about 15 minutes, but of course we want to ask more questions. So go ahead.
I'll keep it very short, but I, once again, agree wholeheartedly with what has been said, and I'm very impressed. There's a saying that the progress of a nation can be judged by the educational level of its women. So the basis for freedom is knowledge. That knowledge comes from education. Yeah. So you educate your women, you educate a nation. Yeah. So that's the benefit of treating females as whole human beings, the whole human beings we are, is that it benefits the females, and it benefits the offspring, and it benefits the males that they are in a relationship with. I like the idea that Ms. Washington mentioned about having the liberty to love. And I'm reminded of a crude but accurate statement my husband makes. He says, "You don't call your rapist your lover."
Right.
So true. You know, and he said it in respect to Nelson Mandela becoming the first president of the Republic of South Africa. And I said, wasn't there another president before? You know, and of course I would, yes, there was another president, but you don't call your rapist your lover. This is such a bad idea, depriving anybody of their rights. It's such a bad idea. I wondered, where is this coming from? So I went through some of the scientific literature, pulled up an article that talked about the mystery of the declining US birth rate. So apparently, since 2007, the recession of 2007, the birth rate has been fluctuating within a relatively narrow range. And prior to 2007, the birth rate was fairly high and consistent. But after 2007, it has dropped precipitously. And not just for white women, although that's the prevailing notion. It's dropped for all of us here in the West, for Latinx, Latina women, for African American women, for Asian women, for Native American women. Our birth rates have dropped. Now, why? That's another question. I'm sure there's some very strong physiology behind that. But this push to mandate reproduction in women, I am so glad that I'm not reproducing now, you know, because what a burden. Like, how dare anyone who doesn't have a uterus dictate the condition of mine? You know, it's like women deciding who should have a prostatectomy, that is removal of the prostate gland, when we don't have a prostate gland, you know, and don't know about a prostate gland, and have no right to make rules about some man's prostate gland. So I think, again, when a bad idea stalls in the population, it's usually serving some other purpose. And the purpose, I think, here is the assumption that we can rectify this declining birth rate. But we can't. demographically. So we have to also accept the fact that God changes, he does whatever he wants to do. And if he wants to change the ethnic composition of the United States, well, it's his land. We're his servants, so we just go with the flow and live your best life, but don't try to counter the qadr of Allah, the will of God, if that's what the will is. Not every nation stays in power forever. Every civilization goes through wanes and waxes. So this declining birth rate means that we are not the people we were 100 years ago. We have options, and those options are fundamental to our existence, and they're part of the cycle, the normal cycle. So I think we should be very careful trying to subvert the normal transitions that occur in societies.
Fascinating. Yes, I quite agree. I think one of the things that you learn as a husband for 35 years is to learn how to be quiet and to listen. And I have been doing that for at least almost an hour now, and my wife would be very proud of me. Monica, one of the things that I value about Monica is that there's no way that I can understand what it means to be a woman. Right. And I definitely cannot understand what it means to be a woman before God, because it is different. And it's important that I get that and understand that. And it brings to my awareness a fuller view of humanity. And I can tell you that this has been very valuable to me. You made me a better husband. Ms. Washington, I must tell you that I really wanted to have more Christian presenters on this panel, but you have made up for them. And I must tell you, we actually invited, I think, 5 Christian ministers, and unfortunately, they have calendar issues, but it's okay. October is a very tough time for scheduling, especially if you're of the Christian faith. But I want to give Ms. Washington the last word. I know that this has been informative to you. Tell me what you think about the discussion, and close us out.
Yeah, so as I said before, this has been a wonderful discussion. I've learned so much, as I always do in your discussions. And so we started it out talking about how Martha talked about how true freedom equals justice and purpose. And when we think about how women are being treated now in our society, it really is about power, right? So we just talked about the birth rate declining, and then you look at our immigration policy in this country. It has shifted over time, and we used to have a society that opened our borders to others, and now not so much. And so when you have a declining birth rate and you have an immigration policy that with closed borders, then you have a population problem, right? How do we address that? So let's go to the women, right? So let's see if we can fix that over here. And so it's always this struggle in the society where those who are deemed as not in power, right? We are not white or male. We are always bearing the brunt of whatever society's ills are. And here it is again showing up for us. And as Christians and people of faith and Muslims, we really need to come together and say, this is not who we are. This is not an acceptable way forward for us. You cannot take this issue from us and make it about God, because this is not about God. This is about your power over us. Set God aside in this conversation, because God, as we have made clearly throughout the discussion, God is love. God is about free will. God is about justice. And so these decisions that these men are making about women are not that. And so as always, I want to thank you for inviting me and letting me be the fly on the wall and listen in on your conversations.
I can tell you that this one has benefited me more than I thought. I really appreciate this idea of justice that Martha has brought up, because I think that that's what we've been talking about this whole evening is about justice. And thank you, Imam, for the Quranic positions that you have put forward. They were very clear, and you almost have to be like, you almost have to put your fingers in your ear not to hear the import of that powerful statement that you read to us. And thank you for the biologist who joins us and brings together both the soul, body, and mind in just one brief comment. And this was very informative. I'm looking forward to editing it and getting out to the public. Thank you very much for everyone's time and attention. And I look forward to connecting with you in the very near future. May God bless you all.
Thank
Salam.
you.
Our concluding lecture is by Dr. Amina Wadud.
And the purpose of it really is to get to the place of a little bit of conversation about Islamic feminism, which I'm considering a methodology for the production and construction of new knowledge in living Islam. You will see that it will include critical reading of the classical intellectual canon of Islam, but with a lens that incorporates gender as a category of thought. Against the backdrop of the Arab Spring and the radical changes that are going on in the Middle East, this lecture focuses on Islam as a global phenomenon. In fact, there are more progressive gender debates in Indonesia than in all of the Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, and Turkish-speaking countries combined. This globalization lens has special benefit when looking at the development of the Muslim women's movement. It also helps to locate my work within that movement and grants it legitimacy. I have worked on gender issues in a way that would lead to Islamic feminism before it had a name and before I could own the word feminism as appropriate for my work and perspective. I do not now, nor have I ever, lost sight of my aim: to make certain articulations towards gender equality within the faith or from a faith perspective. I was born in the West to Christian parents. My sojourn in Islam had nothing to do with Western feminist movements because they tended to marginalize women of color, poor women, and non-heterosexual women. My principal motivation in the gender debates is linked to my spiritual yearnings. For God is bigger than any discourse, acts in ways not fathomable to human beings at all, and yet is intimately connected to each human being, even if they choose not to respond to that living presence or reality. So this benevolence is not intended to offend or to be imposed on people who do not believe in God. I say this instead because it is important to my location and to focus on theological elements in the debates over women's empowerment in the context of Islam. We cannot say anything about Islam and Muslims until we're clear what we mean by Islam. Every discussion about Islam and women must begin with the meaning of the word Islam. People involved with the struggle for or against Islamic reform often operate on a presumption that there is a uniform agreement on the meaning of the word. When people say, for example, Islam is a violent religion, or Islam means peace, or Islam prohibits homosexuality, or in Islam you must wear hijab, the source of such abstractions is frequently not provided. One important development that the women's movement helped to forge in international discourse at the end of the 20th century was the distinction between Muslim cultures and Islamic primary sources, that is, the Quran, the established Sunnah, authentic Hadith, and sometimes Islamic law or fiqh. And it's funny because in trying to get people to move away from certain static notions of Islam, even people who are working in progressive Islamic circles tend to defer back to these kind of conservative definitions when they're talking about Islam. So they make themselves as a response to or reaction or an alternative of. And part of what I'm trying to do is to get Islam to be, once again, more dynamic. In the Quran, the word Islam and Muslim are both used with reference to an historical community and to the state or posture, and to a state or posture vis-a-vis all of creation, the posture of conscientious surrender to the harmony of the universe. Indeed, the Quran says all of nature is Muslim. All of creation is harmonious, following a certain order with balance between its constituent parts. In all of my discussions about Islam and about Muslim women, I build upon a definition of Islam encapsulated by its most basic and fundamental principle, Tawheed. There is no Islam without Tawheed. At its most fundamental level, it refers to God as one. For matters of social justice, it refers to the more intensified form of its syntactical origin, the making of one from fragments, that is diversity or plurality. It could be then defined as unity. The social principle of Tawheed mandates a relationship between human beings of equality and reciprocity. The other question we have to figure out when we discuss Islam and women is, what is the role of women in Islam? I work only on the basis of an understanding that the role of a woman is to be a Khalifa on the earth, a moral agent of Allah within the sacred order of balance and harmony in the universe. This teleology is confirmed by the Quranic passage, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. Indeed, I will create an agent on the earth. Woman was not created as a byproduct of, helpmate for, or second-class citizen to man. Furthermore, her agency is in a direct relationship to God, unmitigated by men's agency, or by family. This agency is to be manifest by actions fil ard, in the creation, or literally on the earth, standing up for justice and gender equality, working to reform asymmetrical gender policies, and toppling tyrannical practices and epistemologies are thus essential to an agent as part of the human-divine relationship. These aspects of justice work are all mandated by Allah and established by the prophetic Sunnah. Coincidentally, this is the same as the role of men in Islam. Women are human. They do not depend upon men for their humanity. It is given to them by Allah. While women have always been a part of the community, expected to conform to the development of Islam within that community, in the early development of the foundational paradigms of Islamic thought and practice, they did not enjoy equal participation in establishing the fundamental understanding of what is Islam. In fact, as the Muslim empire spread geographically and politically, especially after the Abbasid period, women's contributions to the fundamental canon of Islam would be further marginalized and ultimately silenced. This had a profound effect on the future of Islamic thought and in the establishment of both legitimacy and authority. If we look back over Islamic history from our vantage point, we see a very minor role that women played in establishing the basic epistemology that would come to stand as authority or legitimacy. For example, in the 12th century, the famous and prolific scholar Ahmed al-Ghazali symbolized the agent, that is the Khalifa, the agent in Islamic philosophical terms, by comparison with the lute instrument, the little blowing instrument. He even compared the number of orifices in the body with the number of holes in the lute, totally disregarding the distinctive number of orifices in the female body from the male body. Today, women are present and accounted for at every level of the community, including the scholarly and ritual community. Women participate fully in establishing new canon, constructing new traditions, forming new policies, living in the present, with a loving yet critical eye on the past and a conscious trajectory towards the future. This is proving to be a bit of a corrective for the asymmetry between women and men and Muslim communities.